Welcome, everyone. I'm Andrew Stark. I'm a co-director of Walk, Listen, Create. It's a not-for-profit which supports artists, performers and writers who do things on foot or write about it or experience it or create experiences for you to consume on foot. And one of the things we really try to do is try to support as many people as we can with our frugal budget. And one of the people we've had great conversations with in the past is Anne Forrest. And Anne came up with this lovely idea that she wanted to interview American writers, but she didn't just want to have one at a time. She actually wanted to have a couple of them. So this is our third outing. And I have to really thank Anne for bringing us some fantastic guests, and it's no different this time. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce Anne, which I've managed to get to do a couple of times already in previous occasions. So I'm just going to read her bio, and then I'm going to hand over to Anne, who's going to really run the event and is the host. So this is Anne. Anne Forrest is drawn to the resonance of place. Her short stories, essays, and poetry have appeared most recently in Hippocampus, One Art, Quarter After Eight, Gyroscope Review, and Royal Beauty, and a collection of ekphrastic writing. She's the editor of Ways of Walking, an anthology of essays published by New Door Books in 2022. Inspired by her experience of walking the entire perimeter of Philadelphia. That project has prompted ongoing explorations with a growing community of walking artists and writers about the power of slow creative practice and art as collective witness, most recently at India's Shillin Institute. Anne, welcome, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks so much for giving us this platform and to bring American walkers and writers into the wonderful network of Walk, Listen, Create. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm excited to continue this series. I'm thrilled today to have these two guests. I love their work. I feel like I know them, even though I've only met them online. Antonia and I have had some conversations, and we've had emails back and forth. They're also friends of each other, which makes this a promising conversation as well. They have their two books, as you'll see, are different in style and approach, but they're also interesting themes to talk about and to continue this exploration of what does it mean to be walking in America. So the first book is our first reader, and the first book is by Jonathon Stalls. It's called Walk, Slow Down, Wake Up, and Connect at 1 to 3 miles per hour, Inclusive Stories and Practices. There's a subtitle and a sub-subtitle, but they're all very important to the book and what it is. Jonathon Stalls spent 242 days walking across the United States in 2010, and has continued to walk alongside thousands of people for thousands of miles. He describes himself as a walking artist. He advocates and organizes for racial, economic, and social justice, identifies as LGBTQIA2S+, queer gay, is currently the creator of Intrinsic Paths and the Pedestrian Dignity Campaign, and is the founder of Walk to Connect. Jonathon finished his studies at the Living School for Action and Contemplation in 2017. He has committed much of his life to helping people deepen their relationships to one another, to the natural world, and to themselves at an unhurried pace. Thanks, Jonathon.
Thank you so much, Anne. Really grateful. Does it make sense we should go right into the reading at this stage? Would that be
Yeah, if you want to frame it in any way you can, but you don't need to do a big preamble. We'll get into them. Raise questions and people will ask them.
Well, I'm so grateful you all are here. Thank you for making the time. As As Anne said, it's just, yeah, just this conversation to be with other writers and thinkers and artists around moving in an unhurried way is such a gift. And also to be sharing a space with Nia, who I just adore, and all of her amazing work and writing in this world. So yeah, just really honored you're here. As Anne just planted some seeds in the intro, there's lots of paths in my creative work as a walking artist, but I find a lot of the threads just that they're connecting, mostly in the unhurried pace frame. And so the subtitle, the slow down, wake up and connect at 1 to 3 miles an hour is really, it's really the centerpiece for so much of my artwork and writing and activism. And so, yeah, I'm excited to share some of this book with you. Are we good if I just go right into reading? Can we do that? All right. So this is the cover of the book. I'm gonna read. This is a story. So this, just really quick, this is a book that has it's creative nonfiction, and it has stories, practices, artwork, essays. I'm also a pen and ink artist on top of all the other things, and so I integrate a lot of these different aspects throughout the book. And North Atlantic Books is the publisher. They were so wonderful to work with in curating this piece together that allowed all these different parts to coexist. And so as you see here, this is a pen and ink art piece of an eye that is opening in the horizon line. And you have trees that are, meant to imitate an eyebrow in different seasons. But I call this piece is a part of a pen and ink series I call Earth Integration. And so I have pen and ink artwork throughout the book alongside different stories. So I'm going to read a story from the introduction, and then afterwards I'm going to do a small reading from chapter 3. So this one is titled Walking as Waking Up. I remember a hawk swirling above us that day. It followed our route for several hours, landing on the occasional tree or energy pole. As I continued to look up, I was deeply aware that my relationship to time was dramatically changing. I had time to feel and to be in my senses. I had time to honor the presence of this winged teacher. I had time to notice the way it preened its feathers and gripped the pole with strong, curled claws as it watched us walk by. I smiled a lot as it flew. We made eye contact several times throughout the day. The rain was getting heavier. My head was mostly down to avoid the sting of sideways drops. I was only 3 days into my cross-country walk. The misty, cloudy, and gloomy wetness of March in Delaware had a romantic effect on me. I felt held by the forested trees and their leaves draped like wet blankets. It was the start of a whole new way of seeing the world and ultimately myself. When I watched the flying hawk, I noticed my own desire to soar. When I felt the rain hit my skin, I invited it to wash away fear and unhelpful stories. When I saw the sun peer through the clouds, I could almost touch the warmth of my own inner light. There we were, Kanoa, my cherished furry friend, and I, moving on the slim shoulder of a winding, busy street. This would be my first night without a place to stay. As the setting sun approached, anxiety began to take over. Where would I sleep? My many moments with the hawk, sky, streams, and trees that day helped me to trust that I would land where I needed to land, and I was still terrified. This day was also my first official state crossing. At my unhurried walking pace, it took me 2.5 days to cross into Maryland from Delaware. It felt epic. It was epic. I had never done anything like this. I always encourage people who are interested in a cross-country walking journey to start in Delaware for this reason. It was still raining and getting darker fast. I was about to make a left turn a mile up the road toward Martinac State Park, which rests along the Choptank River in Maryland. My plan was to call the local ranger to get permission to camp. I also knew that at some point I would need to just put that damn tent down for the night without permission. The rain started to pick up, and so did our pace. Before too long, I heard a faint voice from the woods behind us. Out of nowhere, From the misty, thick forest, a woman came running out, waving with one hand and shielding rain with the other. She greeted us. Hi, I'm Haley. Do you mind if I walk with you for a few minutes? Of course. Are you okay? It's pouring out, I said. She started briskly walking alongside of us. Cars were buzzing by, occasionally splashing us, and I kept remembering Kanoa's face looking back up at me every so often with gratitude and confusion related to the already really long walk. What is happening? Why is she out here walking with us? I kept thinking to myself. I was quickly drawn to her lightness and curiosity. She had long brown hair pulled into a ponytail. She had work clothes on with shoes that were not made for walking in the rain. She was, however, plenty fine joining us in the roadside downpour. I loved it. I was driving home from work and I noticed your dog's curly tail. I then saw the Kiva Walk across the USA sign on your backpack. I rushed home to check you out online. As soon as I saw your site, I had to know more. I knew if I ran the back way from my house through the woods, I would catch up to you. We continued walking in the rain. I offered her my rain jacket and she finally took it. 10 minutes went by and she stopped. Would you like a place to stay? She said, somewhat quick and lighthearted. You know, it's pouring. I love animals. I don't want you both out here in the rain. We can have a meal and I'll just come pick you up when you're done with your route, she finished. Here we are. Haley is around 5'4" and I'm 6'4". I am drenched with rain, mud, sweat, and a steamy smell from not showering in 2 days. Kanoa is drenched, muddy, and looks like a wolf. This woman, with her hands over her eyes, is looking up at me on the side of the state highway, asking us if we wanted dinner and a warm, dry place to stay. Dumbfounded and overjoyed. Are you sure? Wow, I don't know what to say. I mean, yes, that would be wonderful, but are you sure? This is strange, isn't it? I mean, it shouldn't be, but thank you. I fumbled. There it was. My first trail angel. Someone just showing up as if out of the sky with hospitality, heart, life, nourishment, and love. Well before my walk, I reached out to people who had done walks like this. Each of them had used this term, trail angel. It was in my mind, but it landed hard in my heart after meeting Haley. The temperature was dropping. I asked Haley if she would be okay meeting us in an hour at the shopping plaza down the street. She agreed. I put my stealth camping fears away for the night. I knew they were coming for me and I needed them to, but not tonight. Haley came to pick us up. I loved her home. It was colorful and cozy. I walked into her skinny hallway to drop my pack and take off my shoes. She had animal fences, toys, and jungle gyms everywhere. She had 7 cats and a rescue dog. We sat on her couch, ate our food, and right away began exchanging meaningful stories. I remember cherishing her laugh. She had such a large and contagious smile with full cheeks and friendly eyes. We covered personal beliefs, stereotypes, sexual orientation and identity, past relationships, family, fears, pain and hardship, dreams, love of animals, hope, consumerism, and so much more. My heart was full. There was no hesitation in sharing just about anything with her. She is that kind of person, and it was that kind of moment. I remember ruminating before sleeping that night that maybe we all have the capacity to be these kinds of people if given the right kinds of moments. She shared with me that she had never done anything like this, and since her job was at an animal shelter, she thought that Kanoa was the sure ticket that we might be okay. What if I didn't have Kanoa? What if I was Black or darker skinned? What if she knew I had a boyfriend before getting to know me? What if I was wearing a hijab? What if I was a woman? What if I was someone who was walking in the rain without a home? I thought to myself. I carried these aches with me throughout my entire journey. They were important questions for a country and an individual, me, that I felt like I was getting to know more fully and more honestly for the very first time. As I ate breakfast reflecting on the night before, I knew that I would never forget Haley. I will never forget the way it felt to see her running out from the woods in the rain with her waving hands and eyebrows tilted upward. With a wide open heart and eyes full of tears, I said farewell to my new friend and my first trail angel. Thank you all. I always picture, I can't even begin to describe Haley's cheeks, so full, so big, so rosy, and 7 cats when they saw Kanoa drenched walk into that hallway and what they did. But it was such a, I share this story as one of the stories. This was such a foundational experience for me. I was going through a lot of really, really hard, heavy things, and I needed to recalibrate. So walking across the US was not, I'd never done anything like this before. For those of you who've done long hikes, walks, my backpack weighed 95 pounds. So you know that this is something, you haven't done before. I simplified the weight pretty quickly into that experience, but this was really it was a recalibration journey. I needed to start over. I had friends drop me off on the Delaware coast and just started walking. And so I was really seeking um, new teachers and trees and people. So to have Haley by day 3 show so much trust was it just recalibrated so many things for the journey ahead. One of my favorite authors, Adrienne Marie Brown, who's this amazing writer, um, one of my favorite quotes from her writing is moving at the speed of trust. And I think about this story so much when we're walking in the rain next to a state highway, 10 minutes, but unhurried anyway. So I'm going to shift a little bit to this next reading. This is connected to chapter 3 in the book. And chapter 3 is titled Walking as a Human Right. And so one of the things that became so loud for me as just an artist, as somebody who's extremely sensitive, but also very much as someone who was doing this long cross-country walk from a place of seeking new teachers. I wanted to be brought into new waves of learning in my environment with other people. And so the built environment specifically became very loud related to what is safe and what isn't safe in being somebody who's walking or someone who uses a wheelchair or someone who takes transit. I connected with so many people waiting at bus stops or trying to navigate really unsafe intersections in all weather. And it has changed so much of my life and my work. A lot of my activism and storytelling and art making is centering this experience through the Pedestrian Dignity Project. So I'm going to offer this. This is a little more like, I title it like a visualization. So I just invite you to close your eyes for this one. Just an invitation, no rules, but just to have your eyes closed and to sink into the scene that I'm going to be describing here. And maybe take a deep breath too, just to ground us together. It's wherever it meets you, a deep, deep breath. Connecting our humanity and our breathing, our connection to each other and our breathing. Visualization, drenched and depleted. You are walking or moving in a wheelchair. You are en route to catch the only bus that goes to where your medical appointment is. It runs every hour and sometimes doesn't show up at all. You know the buses in the early morning are more reliable. It rained heavy last night and street medians, intersections, and paved over watersheds are flooded. You are dodging, skirting around, or having to go right through the water. You get splashed by rushing high-speed traffic. Because of the flooding, you have to go slower than usual. Your back hurts because you didn't sleep well. Your shoulders hurt because it's not good for you to carry all these groceries. Your glasses are fogged up and you can't wipe them. You're angry because you slipped and a can of soup went rolling into the gutter. Your mind is heavy because you are exhausted from the grind. Your heart aches because you never seem to get enough time with loved ones. Shit, you see the bus several blocks ahead. It's 10 minutes early. The no bench, no shelter bus stop is full of people waiting. You see them start to get on. You panic. Maybe you can make it if they take their time. Yelling won't help. You can't wave your hands. You pick up your pace, clench your bags, hold your pain, and try. There it goes. Everyone got on, except you. You worked so hard to arrive early too. You knew the weather would be bad. You knew you had to be quick at the store. The bus flies right by you, splashing you on the way out. You tried to wave your arms, make a scene, and ignite sympathy from the driver. Not today, not on most days. Cars continue to rush past you. No one sees you. Time turns to heavy mud. You must stand for the next hour and wait for the next bus, if it comes. No bench, no shelter, drenched, depleted. You could rest in a nearby cafe, but you have to buy something. You can't sit in the patch of thorny grass because it's soaked and would hurt your knees. You also need to use the restroom. Where could you possibly go? Hold it in. You will be shamed and fined if you go in public. Keep it in. So I invite us just to take a deep breath as we think about this scene that is so common for millions of people. Just allowing this invitation to sink in, to move with you. How does it make you feel? Have you ever felt this way related to your transportation experience? Why? Or why not? How might class, race, health, ability, and time spent in an automobile influence or impact your reflection? Thanks, you all.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm looking out at the rain that's about to begin and seeing the trolley stop at my corner that does not have a bench. So that I think there are more frequent stops, but it is a common urban scene that we can all, that those of us who live in cities certainly can imagine. And part of and we'll talk more about this and this conflict. It's interesting in that chapter that you chose, Walking as a Human Right, you actually quote Antonia in another part of that chapter, bring her in. So
Absolutely.
it seems like a good way to bring in the conversation and move to Antonia.
Yes.
So Antonia's book is called A Walking Life, Reclaiming Our Health and Our Freedom, One Step at a Time. And it also has a wonderful cover, I love that, with lots of different types of walkers. Antonia Malchik has written essays and articles for Aeon, The Atlantic, High Country News, BuzzFeed, excuse me, I wrote something else, BuzzFeed, Ideas, Orion, and a variety of other publications. She lives in Northwest Montana with her family. And you can follow her newsletter on Substack that she's writing called On the Commons, which is wonderful, and about the tension between private property and the commons and freedom to roam. Antonia, welcome.
Thank you, Anne. This is really hard for me because I just want to talk about everything Jonathon just read and the work he does. Everyone hear me okay? Just unmuted myself. And also, I don't think we mentioned this at the beginning, but people might not know that Jonathon and I have been friends for quite a long time. When I was researching A Walking Life, I can't remember how I came across your TEDx talk, Jonathon, but somewhere. And I watched it and then I was like, oh my gosh, this guy gets it. Like he really understands, you know, what it's all about and what I'm trying to write about. And so I emailed him and we ended up having just the most incredible conversation over some sort of video call before that was the norm, I think, maybe Google Hangouts. And we've met, I think at the National Walking Summit is the one time we met in person. So I interviewed Jonathon for my book. There's some passage on his work in there, and he's just been really inspiring to me in the way I think about walking, and also with his activism work, which is just, it's mind-blowing to me, the work that he does. And the things we care about tend to intersect very closely. And it's amazing to me that you read those passages, because the passages I chose are ones I've never read before. I usually have a couple standard ones that I read, and they're about human connection and freedom to move. And I was like, what are the odds? Anyway, I'll go into that so we can have time for more questions and stuff afterwards. Oh, and interestingly, mine are also from the introduction in chapter 3. So I don't know what we were doing with our earrings and our selections, but we keep vibing together. Anyway, Anne showed you this is my book. I really like the cover. She had a fun little story she told when we did a practice session about her granddaughter, I think it was, who came up with little stories for all the little people on the cover.
Yeah.
And that made me really happy, because I told the publisher I wanted it to feel like an invitation, and I'm not a very visual person, so I didn't know what that would look like. And I really enjoyed what they came up with. Okay, so this is from the introduction, and it's just kind of general. When we walk, time slows down and our multitasking brains rest and reconnect with our creative selves. When we walk, we become something we've forgotten during centuries of technological revolution and the race to make our lives ever more efficient and productive. We become more human. And in walking, we find the space to ask ourselves a question that perhaps we've been avoiding, one that, in part, I wrote this book to explore. What does that mean? There are many stories in these pages, and many of them have a solitary component, an essence of aloneness. But in each of these, that aloneness is offset with human bonds. Our walking stories nearly always hold these connections, even when they're unacknowledged. In her memoir, Wild, Cheryl Strayed recounts a solo journey she took hiking the Pacific Crest Trail to process her mother's death and her own broken sense of self and self-worth. The point of the journey is Strayed alone, but the lingering memory of her story, for me, was how many people helped her along the way, how many connections she made through the simple act of others' spontaneous generosity. Even when we are solitary, we do not walk alone. Toward the end of his nonfiction book On Trails, Robert Moore ends up in Morocco trying, with 2 guides, to map a trail that would be a kind of extension of the Appalachian Trail, separated by the vast Atlantic Ocean, but linked geologically by the rocks underfoot, ranges and dirt that had millions and millions of years ago been part of one gigantic landmass. Musing on the connections and misunderstandings between people of different cultures, different value systems, and what he calls the problems of, quote, connection without fellow feeling, he wrote, "We can travel at the speed of sound and transmit information at the speed of light, but deep human connections still cannot move faster than the comparatively lichenous rate at which trust can grow." As our digital world connects us more quickly every year, but without much depth, we find ourselves dizzy, addicted, confused, not sure how to keep up, or if we should keep up, and wondering how the speed of connectivity is changing who we are as individuals and societies. These connections are, though, still new and still shallow. To balance them, to learn how to develop them and live with them, we need to allow ourselves the deeper connections that are built step by step over lifetimes and as physical beings in the physical world. To answer, an hour on social media with the irreplaceable delight of walking out our own doors and breathing in this wild world while we wander. The trust we build with one another still occurs, despite all our technological advances, at a human pace. And let's see, this second one, I have a lot of stories in here, or quite a few, I think, about walking with my father and about his childhood. So I was born and raised in Montana. I'm originally from here where I live. And, but my father was born and raised in the Soviet Union, and he emigrated to the US in 1972. And he lived in exile for 17 years. He wasn't allowed to go back. And he grew up under Stalin. He was born right after the siege of Leningrad. Leningrad is where he's from. And so my life has always had this weird cultural intersection of having an entire half of my family that I didn't meet until I was 14 years old. And just this stuff that my dad didn't talk about much until I was older, but that came through in the ways that my household was run and the way I was brought up. Just a sense of what freedom means, a sense of what it means to be able to trust people and to not trust people. When he was a child and Stalin was still in power, you couldn't trust people. You couldn't speak your mind. You couldn't speak freely. And so having people, his friends that he could walk with through the streets of Leningrad, across the canals. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but it's an incredibly beautiful city with just canals and bridges everywhere. Kind of like Paris, which is how Peter the Great wanted it to look. So, but besides the walks being so beautiful, that is where he found freedom of mind in a country and a life where it wasn't an option pretty much for the most part, except with your own family. And even then, at certain times, the government was very effective at turning families against one another. So the lessons from him have been very pivotal in my life and in how I think about walking and freedom. But the sections about him are very short, and I use them to kind of lead into how we think about freedom and walking, and what physical freedom means and what freedom of the mind means. So this is from chapter 3, which is largely about jaywalking and highway development and suburbia, actually. But this is right at the end of it. After my family left Montana in 1991 and settled into Moscow, we took the train to Leningrad to spend time with my father's mother and siblings and to meet my cousin for the first time. There, my father took my younger sister and me on long walks and told us stories of his childhood. His pre-Montana life began to take shape for me, not just in my imagination, but physically. The particular cucumber-like smell in the stairwell of my grandmother's apartment building, the bridges my father had illegally jumped from to go swimming in the Neva River, the route to his school, which he'd hated, and to the zoo, where he'd go by himself to feed the elephants. And woven through all of it were the walks he'd taken later with his friends when they explored the city on foot and the territories of forbidden thought in their conversations. Many years later, long after Leningrad had become St. Petersburg and the Soviet Union had collapsed, when I was living my ex-urban life where I couldn't cross the road from the bookstore to the grocery store without a car, I thought back to my father's walks. Even growing up under Stalin, assuming they avoided being shot or sent to the Gulag, and later after Stalin died and the Gulag was dismantled, but free expression still came with severe consequences. People like my father were free to roam, the mind encouraged in movement by the feet. But my children and I didn't have that particular freedom. Like so many Americans, living where sidewalks do not exist, but busy roads abound. Every errand or outing was predetermined for us, its route mapped and enforced by what was accessible to my station wagon. We could not stray, meander, or wander, and I couldn't help but wonder if our form of movement was beginning to constrain our flexibility of mind. This was really the promise dangled in front of us throughout the car-centric century, which was made possible by jaywalking laws and the eviction of pedestrians from public roads, and initially sold almost exclusively to white America. Owning a car and living in the suburbs made life orderly. Not only could you have the perfectly cut dandelion-free lawn and wide roads for your traffic-free drive to work, but you could avoid the painful mess of living among people whose culture and struggles you didn't understand and whose place in society you questioned. You could get in your sedan and drive away from it all to a world where the difficult questions of justice and equity and reparation and mutual interdependence didn't exist. Or at least you could pretend they didn't. But as human beings have had to learn over and over, there is no a way. You can't just send all your convicts to Australia and have petty crime disappear. You can't throw out your plastic packaging and not have it turn up in the food chain. And you can't get yourself off from people whose race or religion or gender or culture you're not comfortable with and expect that your community, your family, or yourself will always remain exactly as you wish. We will never have all the roads we need for everyone to drive everywhere they want in the free, lighthearted way promised by car manufacturers' advertisements. We will never have all the highways and exits and bypasses, all the country roads and garages and parking lots. The city of Futurama is, like all utopias, something that will never come to pass. The question is, even if that utopia were within our grasp, given the gifts that walking has granted us and how much it still has to offer us and our communities, would we embrace that future? Or do we want something more, a more expansive kind of freedom, a built environment and way of life that can nurture us at every layer of our human selves?
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. That was wonderful. And I think it's true that the two readings really complemented each other really well and brought up themes that I think there's so much that we can talk about. And I want to start with this question. I mean, this theme, freedom, it's such a potent word. And I think right now in our political landscape, it means so many different things to different people. But one of the things I was struck by both your books is that, and this came out in the reading, is that they have these moments that feel deeply personal, but they are also very political and have a point of view that's activist and advocating for a certain kind of change. So I was curious how you both felt about that, and if you see your works as political works.
You want to take that first?
Yeah,
I'm just thinking with your pedestrian dignity work, it's a great lead into what you do with that.
Oh,
And
yeah. Well, yeah. And just thank you, Nia, for what you offered us in your readings. Just really, really just love your work. I'm still feeling it. And thank you for
Same.
that question. Yeah, how do I want to frame it? Absolutely, I would say, yeah, it's like when I think about what the journey to pedestrian dignity as a project now, how that has formed over the years. For just some background for everybody, this is a project that after my cross country walk, the thing that was loudest to me, the loudest thing in the room, the inner room, the outside room, was just the human connection elements, the benefits of moving in an unhurried way next to people, alongside them, across difference, across pace, across ability. I moved with so many people on that cross country walk from all these backgrounds, and I noticed so many consistent threads of connection, just finding embodied places of common ground, maybe not always in the mind, but in our moving bodies. And I was like, this is medicine. This is a teacher. And so I experimented with this project called Walk to Connect for many years right after. And that was focused on training. It's now still a program of a national pedestrian advocacy organization in the US called America Walks. But the focus of the work was to train what we called movement leaders to host community events and for health, for nature, for connection, for all these things. But a big part of it always, because of all the things I learned about the built environment, was to have focus on also on pedestrian mobility and safety as from the vantage point of people who primarily depend on this mode the most. So having people who are a part of our trainings and co-creating what we call walking rolling audits for city elected leaders, for transportation staff, but also other residents, to really ground in how are our systems being informed, how are decisions made on really big budgets, federal, state, city, county, that impact how a road is designed, how it's improved, how it's repaired, what happens when we get funding for an intersection and who's informing the design of that intersection, all these things. And it's when I started at Walk to Connect, I would host these events with a lot of other people with different backgrounds and abilities and stories. And one of the most consistent things that would happen, like literally 99.9% of the time, was people who are, and this is not, I always say this is not, my work is never car shaming. Don't get weird if you drive a car. Like that's not what this work is. It's just, but it was, and it's never shaming people, but I'm a little okay with shaming some systems. So you'll hear that in my tone. But like I would have these circles of, engineers and planners and elected leaders, and we would usually pair our events with walking or moving with people who use a wheelchair or mobility device, but then take transit back to the starting location so people could experience a lot of the disconnect at bus stops, like what you all maybe felt in the story. 99.9% of the time, the feedback would be, I have never walked this road. I have never taken the bus. I have never moved with somebody who uses a wheelchair, or I've never experienced that myself. 99% of the time. And these are people who have had training in urban planning, training in civil engineering. And that's not, there was no like, oh, you bad engineer. It was just really important information around what is informing so much of the design of our roadways and things like that. So I'm kind of going in a circle here, and to your question, but I'll just say that it formed over years and years and years and years of hosting so many events with different people who have different roles and responsibilities in our governing, but also in our designing and engineering of places. And that's where pedestrian dignity came out. I was like, okay, I want to experiment with a little more of, I just want to be a little more raw about how harmful this is for primarily the millions of people that can't and will never drive a car. Like harmful, like violent, like life-threatening, like pedestrian deaths are rising. Cars in the US especially are getting larger with full-on screens in front seat, back seat. And we are still designing roads that are so far from nurturing, to Nia's beautiful words, to nurturing the dignity of mobility for people who walk or use a wheelchair. So that's been the big central anchor for pedestrian dignity. And then going with that is also then people who would choose to drive less if it was safer, more comfortable, more accessible. And then also this responsibility towards our planet and our very limited relationship, our limited resources to sustaining what I call a lot in my work, single occupant car travel, where there's one person in a car doing that trip for every single trip. And so I'll just add the small little note I'll just add. I could go on and on this question, but I'll just, I'll stop just to say this is not just urban. Do a lot of work in rural and suburban. So it's thinking about even like just how to have a different relationship to car travel, having hubs that are outside of destination only car travel, where you just have to drive all the way up to the door and all the way back, but like having different relationships to kind of dropping into a sense of place and have nurturing exchanges, again, referencing Nia's beautiful reading.
Yeah.
So you can see how this gets really political in this, when unfortunately, it's something so intrinsic to our design, to how we're made to move. But you can see how it gets very political in this work. Yeah.
It's before Nia talks, I just want to say something for kind of as a bridge, because I was very struck, and especially in Nia's work, was how she really goes back into the history of this, that this didn't happen accidentally. That, I mean, that was what was the most eye-opening to me, was that there was this concerted effort 100 years ago, a little more than 100 years ago, of the car companies, how they were answering fears of the safety of people walking in streets alongside automobiles, was not to make the cars safer, but to limit pedestrians more and more. And there's so much in your book that talks about the history of that structure. But there's also funny, I mean, I was asking this question about being political, because I think there's a part about sort of making people become activists or want to recognize that there are these issues that come through walking. But there's also a part that the advocacy is very specific about planning. I mean, that we need to think in terms of planning. And so there's this, Nia has this wonderful line in somewhere that it says, she's talking about sidewalks, and then she says, this level of detail is where many passionate walkers lose focus, get worried, wander off get bored, wander off to talk about Thoreau, Beethoven, Wordsworth, and Solnit. And then she says, attention to these details is the only concrete action that will bring everyday accessible walking back into our lives. So I'll give your lines back to you, but I want you to say some more about the political aspects of your book.
Wow, thank you, Anne. That's that I probably wouldn't have remembered to pull that out, so I really appreciate you doing that. Because I was thinking about Peter Norton's work, his book Fighting Traffic, which is where a lot of that research comes from. He's a tech historian, I believe. And I read his book and I've spoken with him many times. He'd be an interesting person to have on, although his work is more about the cars and the history. Anyway, it's funny that you mentioned that line, because I'm trying to think like which part, like Jonathon said, you could just spend 2 hours just straight up talking about exactly this right now, the political and the freedom and how they relate to all of this. So when I very first started thinking about writing about walking, I was living in this area of upstate New York that was rural and I couldn't walk anywhere. And it really hit home when I had a baby. And, if I wanted to push him in a stroller, like go for a walk and push a baby in a stroller, I had to drive 10 miles. So I had to like put him in the car seat and put the stroller in the car, it's just all this thing. And it quickly became apparent to me that my life was completely dependent on the road system and on my functional car. And that's when I started to think about, what does freedom of mobility really mean, and comparing it to my dad's childhood when he was not free to speak, but he had the entire city of Leningrad to just roam on foot, plus the outer parts that you can access by train, just true in a lot of European countries too. And I wrote an essay actually about specifically that, about what freedom means as it relates to walking and thought, for a little online literary journal called Lunch Ticket. I think it's run by Antioch College or something. I'd have to find the link again. It feels like a long time ago now. And I just got really interested in that idea. And then I just, started researching walking more and thinking about how all of that intersects. And then I was reading all these books, and I'm not going to name the books because I don't want to sound like I'm dissing, other writing or other works, but I got very frustrated because I read a lot of books about walking, and every single one of them were about, Thoreau and the Stoics and Einstein and Darwin and all these walks they took, and these thinkers, the philosophers and the artists, and, how Tchaikovsky used to, what did he do? Compose for an hour and then go for a 2-hour walk in the woods and then come back for 45 minutes. It's this whole, people love talking about that. And I kind of think it's a class issue, to be honest. So many people just want to stay in that really beautiful philosophical relationship with walking. And what I ended up telling my publishers was that I really want to start the story that I want to tell, where those books leave off, because I feel like they leave off the entire rest of humanity. When the PR people were talking with me, I was like, look, I want this to be a book. I wanted to think about what it means to be a single mom who's trying to get across Atlanta with groceries. I want to think about what it means to be a dad who has to commute an hour by car each way. But I want to do it in a way that's accessible to people and interesting and really digs deep into where these problems come from. As I often say on my Substack newsletter, I'm kind of obsessed with barriers, like finding where the barriers are to things. And that shows us where we aren't free, or where I might be free. I live in a walkable community now. Car shaming. The most driving I do, actually, I did this morning, which was to take my car in for an oil change. Just a bit ridiculous. And so I had to drive it there, and then I had to walk back into town to go to my middle schoolers talent show to watch them perform, and then walk back, go pick up my car, where it will now sit for 2 weeks doing nothing. So to me, as you were asking the question, Anne, I'm really thinking about how I started with all of that, and a lot of surprise people have expressed about where I went with walking in this book. And to me, I feel like, considering Jonathan's work and how quickly he ran into a lot of these issues, you have to actually make an effort to ignore all of the systemic ways that walking is made inaccessible or dangerous or just, plain out impossible for millions and millions of people. Like you have to work at it to really ignore that. And to me, that's just, it's not acceptable. I don't want to ignore it. If I know that something's out there, I want to dig into it. I want to open it up. I want to figure out what's going on. And so even in my town, like I'm on the bike and pedestrian committee, and we deal with all of these issues like snow removal on the sidewalks. You can't take a wheelchair down the sidewalks if there's snow on it. However, I am also a writer, and I'm one of those people that started writing stories pretty much as soon as I learned to read and write. So I wanted the book, I want the book to be a tool for people, like the kinds of people that Jonathan trains, but I also wanted it to be a joy to read. And I think that's where political work and any kind of activism can really do its best, is when you bring joy into it and pleasure. And I think that's another place where Jonathan and I intersect, is the idea of embodiment. Just getting to like fall in love with what your body can do. From an evolutionary perspective, what it's capable of and what it can give you when you go for walks. And so there's just layers and layers and layers of all of that.
Well, it is a joy to read, and I tell everybody here who hasn't read it yet, it's a great joy, and some of the joy is also the surprise. I mean, there were these wonderful surprises. I want to read you the chapter heads. They both have these great chapter heads, and maybe talk about thinking about the structure, how you structured these books, because I think they're unusual in the way they're structured. So Antonia's is her, I'll just read the contents page, and it's easy. It won't take a long time, but it goes: the first step, toddle, march, stumble, lurch, quest, stride, pace, meander, and invitation. It's like a little poem in and of itself, if you just look at that. But it sets up these expectations, like there's this surprise, because they become about the history of walking and of planning and of the automobile. March is about social protest and cohesiveness. So it's just really interesting. I love, as someone who is a poet, like the word play there and how you played with words. And then Jonathan's is he read from the intro, which was walking as waking up, but then they're walking as human dignity, then as humility, as human right, as earth care, as relationship, as vulnerability, as play, as resistance, as creative wonder, as presence, as rite of passage, and finally, as mystery. And I have to say that besides these being a joy to read, that in both these books, and in a way, this took me by surprise, I was very moved by the end, like near tears in both of them. And I don't even know how to explain that, but there was something of because they're parts of the story that are they start out kind of very concrete and literal in a way. Jonathan's maybe a little less so, but there's a lot of, talking about cars and roads and things like that. And then there's just, you get to a point at the end where it just feels like everything's interconnected. So I want to talk to you, how was that challenging to come up with the structure, or did it just come naturally, that you knew where you were going to begin and where you were going to end?
Mine, so I went, mine was published by one of the big 5 book publishers. And when you go that route, you've got to do a whole book proposal. It's a very involved process. So I've got, I have an overview and marketing ideas and like a page about what each chapter was going to be. And it's very, very involved. And then sample chapters as well. And part of it is a note on structure. So I had to come up with that ahead of time. So what I what I did was I took a screenshot of that famous March of Progress picture. Do you all know
Mm.
that one? Where it's got
The evolution,
it's got like a a monkey and a gorilla and just eventually coming to an upright human. I can't even remember what magazine or year that was. It was in the 60s or 50s even maybe.
60s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
it's a very, very famous picture. If you see it, you probably most of you will know what I'm talking about. So I said, well, the structure will kind of follow that, but I don't know. I was just trying to come up with something. The titles did come to me. I think actually that very first essay that I mentioned in Lunch Ticket, I think I'd used a couple of those as little subheads. So it just came out. The structure didn't end up following that linear path. We moved a couple of chapters around, and I think I said this when we were doing our little practice session, Anne, that one of the quotes I have from Jonathan in there is him describing as walking like a nautilus shell of being human, because it just spirals out into every aspect of the human experience. And I kind of felt like that's what happened with the structure of my book. I didn't necessarily intend it that way, but it's kind of impossible not to, because you keep circling back in and out of different ideas, and the personal and the political and the history and social and all that. So yeah, it just kind of fell together, which unfortunately is not happening for my current book. And
Oh, okay.
not
We can
just
talk about
happening.
that in a
I
bit.
don't know.
Oh, here's Bill Sharp just came up with the March of Progress. Oh, I just missed it. Rudolph Ballinger. Is that what? 1965. So
I'm
good.
books. That's
Okay,
right.
that's just about right. What about you, Jonathan? I think the other thing I want to talk about is sort of the internal structure, because each chapter has its formula. Each chapter, there's exercises in each that have a sort of incantory feel. You have a introduction to each that repeats. That's an invitation and honoring the native lands that we walk on, but then each with a different one. So there's story, and there's your story, there are other people's stories, and then there's also these reflections and instructions or guides. So talk a little bit about that, as well as the overall arc.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my gosh, so much to share. Yeah, I love hearing more context too on your structure too, Nia. That's just really cool. I would say, so for me, I'm such a there's so much moving in my body. I share about this in the beginning of the book. Like, I'm a master, have been, was as a kid, master suppressor. Things just got buried in my stomach, in my hips, and my back since I was little. Hard things, exciting things. I moved every 2 years as a kid growing up. Went to 14 different schools. Coming out was really difficult for me. Being an artist and really sensitive, there was a lot of stuff. So I buried it. I just buried it in this stomach and in all these different places, and I still do. This is a lifelong journey. But I share that just because for me it felt, and I'm maybe jumping to your second question first, just because it comes up right away related to some of the structure within the chapters, but it was the only way I felt like I had these stories from the cross country walk, and I was like, I just don't know that I'm not feeling motivated to write a chronological day 1 to day 242 walk across America book. It's just like cool stories. Like, they've informed so much of my life journey, but I'm not motivated to write it. I was moving so quickly into organizing with Walk to Connect and trying to channel that energy into walking events and leadership stuff and community work. But then through that community work, I only had more stories. I had more people that I had grown really close to from different backgrounds, where we're co-hosting and co-creating walking events, and their unique particular perspectives of feeling safe in a certain place but not in another place, constantly crossing themes of Native, Indigenous, just lived experience, being Black in the US as a lived experience related to walking, being a woman, being just queer and non-binary, being an older adult, all being in a powered scooter. These were people I was hosting multiple events with, as I'm kind of just collecting and wondering if will there be a book. And so, and then as I got a little further along, it was really when I got into my artwork, my pen and ink art, because that's my degree. My training, my formal training is in fine art. So that there was a big pause in a lot of that. My art lived in other ways and other expressions, but my fine art came back in 2020. I'm sorry, in 2018, 2019. And then it was with that, and then when the pedestrian dignity stuff really, when I just I got a little more angry, just to be honest.
Mhm.
And not just anger. I actually prefer the term intuitive unrest. I was just full of unrest. Unrest. I was like, this is not right. Like, pedestrian mobility is legit. This is legitimate. Like, people that all the benefits, like the things Nia was sharing and the other, right, so much of the writing on the benefit, on the creativity, the healing that I experienced on my cross country walk, the healing that I experience every day, because it literally is my primary medicine. So the tension of the benefit and the harm was just getting louder and louder for me. So all of that combined, it was this, it really all came together like, oh my God, I see this now. I see it. I see how these chapters, could hold story, art, a little bit of essay from things that I've learned in hosting so many of these events and walking more and more myself, and and then filling that with practice, because I trust that, like, my main teacher was not studying, not researching. It was through my body. It was lived experience. It was walking and moving with hundreds of people. It was feeling the soil in so many different places. It was through the I talk about it like it was through the pores of my skin in. That was my primary teacher, was the body based. And so it was so important that story and practice, so that, and that you'll see throughout the book, there's just constant permission. Make it yours, make it yours, make it yours. Your pace, your
Mhm.
pace, your details, your comfort, your safety. So there's a lot of effort put into crafting these practices, um, with a lot of inclusion around how this meets people. Like, I don't know all the things, but I know there's medicine here, and here's some tips, and here's some
Mhm.
stories from other people if you think I'm weird, like, just what, and it felt like I care so much about the medicine, and I'm rattled by the harm. And it's like, so this book was just, how can I be an artist that tries imperfectly to touch, like, the range that walking can hold, around benefit and harm in this time. And so that was the structure of the chapter. And the last little note I'll make for the way that, then thank you for reading the chapter titles, because sometimes, the title itself, it's so hard to title a book. It's so hard. Ah. But you can see with my title, there's just a lot going on. And so we eventually, with my publishing team, we agreed that a lot of my book is just meant to plant seeds around embodiment and around action. And so it's why the title is very action oriented. Walk, slow
Mhm.
down, wake up, connect at 1 to 3 miles an hour. And I had to fight for that hyphen. You can imagine, they're like, no, we're not doing the hyphen. I'm like, do the hyphen. We need, there's a range. Not everybody moves at 3 miles an hour. So you can imagine a publisher just, trying to push me and me pushing back. But so the hierarchy model from just our basic need to, I don't, I don't over adopt to it. I'm a very nonlinear person. There's no linear pathway that I deeply believe around that, but it was just a little bit of it helped me craft a little bit of structure in the chapter order. I was like, dignity, right out the gate. Do we believe that everybody has a right to feel safe and comfortable, and to feel like they have a place on this planet to speak and be who they are? Because if we can't get dignity, then the rest of this stuff, you're wasting your time. And then humility, can we break? Do we have the capacity to, like, be humble in this messy, this or that, us versus them? And then the third being a human right, back to kind of Nia's piece around really, like, those detail, can I safely, who's being impacted the most here by not centering our most inherent form of getting around. And then you kind of see the themes as they open towards nature connection. But we start with dignity, we start with access, we start with humility and listening and opening towards the lived experience of people who are different than we are. And then if we can get there or try or kind of fumble in that experimenting, then like, wow, mystery at the end becomes pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So it's that.
Or stumble, you might say.
Yeah.
We did promise a lot of walking jokes.
Right.
That's right.
Right. A lot of walking jokes. And it's hard
Lots
to, we were talking about this the other day, but it's, you can't, if you do walking, if you write about walking, you just can't avoid stepping into the puns. They're like everywhere, and then being self-conscious about them. It's
right. Well,
it's really funny.
Yeah.
Go
ahead. Sorry. No, please go. I could go on and on and
on. I just wanted to, there was something that you said. Well, first of all, about your title and what you were talking about, the sort of the walk, slow down. And it's related to Alexander Huddleston made a comment, and I don't know, Alexander, if you want to frame this more as a question, but she talked about how when she sees the titles of both these books, that they seem like they might be self-help books. And one of the things I love, and I said this to you the other day, Jonathon, about Jonathan's title that you discover is that these aren't commands, they're invitations. They're not the kind of imperative, you must do this. As you move through the book, you understand that these are more of an invitation to walk, to do those things. And there's a generosity in both your books and a sense of inclusion that even just the way that you both quote people, that just feels like we're not in this alone. It's not. So of course you couldn't just write about your solo walk across the country, because it's from the beginning, that first story is about connection. I just want to make one more of a comment, and you can respond to it or not, but I do want to have time for people in the audience to ask questions too. But the thing that I was struck by, and as you were talking about the body-based, I think one of Nia's argument is that when we lose walking, we lose our humanity. But then I think in Jonathan's book and Nia's book too, is this the converse is true. When we walk, and really when we just start walking, we regain so much. And that's really about being human, and you start connecting with other humans, and you start connecting with noticing what's problematic in ways that you don't when you're shielded from other people and feel that you're out there on your own in your machine. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, or if there are people that want to ask questions and follow up on that as well. Do I have any questioners?
Share?
You can unmute.
I love questions. This is my favorite part of doing these things, the Q&A and conversations.
So Alexander, I don't know are you still here? I have to say that I have a problem with my computer, and I'm on my iPad, so navigating the chat and the views of people is a little back and forth. But Alexander, if you're still here, do you want to ask a little more? You had some very good comments.
Okay, I'll try to be more here than I was.
Hi.
Hello. So despite my accent, I am American. I say that because it relates to my question. My first long walking experiences were in Europe. I think, as with many people, along the Camino de Santiago, and then I went on to walk the Shikoku pilgrimage, and then do other long walks. I haven't done any long walks in the US, although I've done short explorations of certain territories, purposefully, because I feel like it would be really unpleasant to do it here. Frankly, maybe not everywhere, but in a lot of the US, So as you might have seen in the question on the chat, although I know it's hard to read the chat when you're talking, when I first saw the titles of your guys' book, both of them, in fact, I kind of hesitated to sign up to the program because I thought, oh, it's going to be like a self-help book. But then, considering that this is Walking in America, I'm like, well, maybe that's really relevant. And maybe, that's actually, we need it so much. We need the self-help component so much more than our European friends do. I mean, of course, you have a lot of systemic issues in Europe. I'm aware, but the problem, and it is a problem. I agree with you. Both the problem of our car culture, and where that has led us as a culture as a whole is the more you walk and think about walking, the more intense it is. And so I don't know how much you guys have walked outside the US. I understand Nia has walked in Russia a bit, but maybe if you guys have something to speak to that particular American problem aspect, shall we say, although maybe not. I mean, I sort of feel like maybe your entire books are about that. So maybe my question's too big.
My gosh, we could just talk. I know Nia and I both could talk for hours to what you just shared, Alexandra. Nia, go ahead and go, and I'll jump in if you want.
I was going to ask you to go first because I wanted to grab a book.
Oh, okay.
No, that's okay. I can just put it in the chat later. Or I'll just grab it after I'm done. It's called Windswept by Annabelle Abbs. I don't know if anyone has ever read that. She also wrote another book called 52 Ways to Walk under the name Annabelle Streets. She's English. And I was going to grab Windswept because it's about women walking. So it's all of these like Gwen Johns, who was a Welsh painter, Nan Shepherd, whom a lot of you might know, who wrote The Mountain about Scotland, Frida Lawrence, and Georgia O'Keeffe. And it's a lovely book. I love her voice. It was one of those books that I just kept reading. Oh, it sounds like Tamsin has read it. And she's just a delightful person. She had me do her intro book launch for her. It was over Zoom, but it was like a Chicago bookstore thing. And she just writes so beautifully about walking, and she incorporates a lot of her own walks within it, especially the way that Jonathon did. My book has maybe less of that. And when she does the Georgia O'Keeffe part, she flies into Texas, I think it is, and just oh, she is busy. She just came out with a new book on sleeping and is writing another one on migration, I think. She's amazing. She's so productive. Anyway, so she lands in Texas, and just her experience being from England and having walked, she takes her family hiking and trekking a lot all over Europe, and then walks by herself through France. Simone de Beauvoir, I'm going to mispronounce that name because I don't speak French, but she writes about her. And for her, the shock of coming to America, maybe particularly places like Texas, and realizing that she's not certain where she is allowed to walk, what she can access, if she might run into violence just for stepping over a line that she didn't know was there. It's really huge. And this is, it's a particular, this kind of runs into more of the work I'm doing now, which is about private property and ownership and things. But as I told Anne before, I feel like they're very intersected. You can't talk about walking without talking about where you can't walk. And I think that she wrote about that really, really well, because she comes from, a place where she feels like she has the freedom to roam. It's not quite a Scottish freedom right to roam, but it's, she has the paths that she can walk. And we had a conversation about it, I think, during her book launch. And she talked about how just inconceivable it was to her that she couldn't step out her front door and just be able to walk where she felt like going. And I thought, that's the core of what kept hitting me as I started to think about walking, when my kids were little and I was living in that rural place, and just suddenly turning around and realizing all the places that you can't walk and why is it closed off and how is it closed off. And then someone else has been very influential for me is Garnett Cadogan. I don't know if anyone's read his work. Also an incredible person. And he was working on a book about walking. I don't quite know what happened with that. He's probably still working on it. I should ask him, but he wrote a book or an essay, which should be a book. It's called Walking While Black. And he's originally from Jamaica. And so it's all about how his walks and the freedom it gave him as a young child, especially in an abusive household, and then comparing that with what it's like to walk as a Black man in the US and the barriers that he was running into that he didn't know were there, that aren't, physical necessarily, but are social, political, created, and very violent. And so I think it's just, it's such a huge thing in the US. But I have, I've lived my husband's from England. I should say that. We met at St. Andrews when I was studying abroad there. Long time ago now. And we originally lived in Vienna in Austria when we were first married. And then we lived in Sydney, Australia for a couple of years before moving back to the US. And, my husband, I don't know why he always wanted a car. He grew up, his dad worked for Brit Rail for 40 years and his mother has several disabilities. So that's part of why disability is very important to me and why I get frustrated with it not being in other walking books other than Jonathon's. But he never grew up with a car. His parents never learned to drive. But he really, really loves the kind of American car thing, not the full-on car culture. Like he hasn't bought an oversized truck, but it's baffling to me. I'm like, why would you want to embrace that when you've had a lifelong experience of being able to get everywhere you wanted to? You grew up in Nottingham, which has a wonderful public transportation system, at least in my experience. Anyway, yeah, so it's I think it's a really big deal in the US. And it's one of those buried things that, again, I think is down to class issues, that it doesn't get talked about as much because the people doing most of the talking aren't the ones doing most of the walking to get around, a walking life. They might go for hikes, they might go for pleasant walks, but they're not really using walking as transportation, which, as Jonathon, pointed out in his reading, includes buses. And I think, thinking about buses sounds so boring and dull. And people are like, I don't want to think about public transportation. I mean, you want a walkable world in the US because we have so much car-built infrastructure. We have to think about buses. And it sounds boring, but maybe there's a way we can make it less boring, like by doing it, ride the bus. It's interesting. I don't know. I kind of rambled with that one. I don't know if totally answers your question, but Jonathon will take it down a different path.
Oh, thank you, Nia. Just everything. I mean, you can just tell there's so much to unpack around when you really lean into the benefits of this and the gaps and the barriers. I keep thinking about, there's so much to share. Alexandra, I put a link in the chat when I saw your comment, because the self-help thing drives me nuts, but it's also like, it is like it is, but it isn't. It's not like, no, don't put it on that shelf. But I guess, yes, like we need a lot of help. Like, yeah, but no, it's super strange. And I thought I kind of had to keep all that like inside, because I'm like, I don't, when you put, similar to Nia's process, I went the route of traditional publishing, proposal, and you are in compromise. You're kind of putting it out, and you're trusting it with a team of people. And I maybe had a little more, I had a lot of creative input on mine, just because I kind of warned them in the beginning before I signed the contract. I'm like, I'm gonna be a little bit of a hot mess about a couple things, the title and the cover. But when they first put it under self-help, and I said, you've got to add other categories. This cannot only be self-help. I just can't. I fought, and they're like, well, it's really, I'm like, no. Anyway, I'm saying all that, Alexandra, just because the review, this really wonderful librarian did this review, and it's such a beautiful review of the book, because it holds all the tension I feel around the book, like the self-helpy, but not. She's very like, I kind of thought, she literally said what you said. I kind of thought it was self-help, And I don't really like those books, but this was not it, you know. And she just kind of does this beautiful job of like, as you kind of comb underneath some of the invitations Nia and I are inviting, like, because walking is so personal, it's so it's also so it's so fundamental. Walking or rolling, if you're unhurried on a mobility device, moving in an unhurried way is this kind of baseline experience, whether it's in a grocery aisle or for transportation or getting in and out of a car in a parking lot or on a footpath, on a mount, like whatever it is. In the US, we have such a weird, I write about this in the book, we have a weird fascination with separating hiking and walking. Are you a hiker or a walker? Are you a biker or I'm not a walker, I'm a biker. I'm not a walker, I'm a runner. And it's like, stop. Like we have lost our way in over identifying with activity, with consumption, with brands, with like, so yeah, putting that into a title or into like, when we're both trying to, I feel like with Nia and I, like in our own ways, just trying to like comb through like these kind of more fundamental relationships that are really, really important, that are medicine, but are also extremely harmful because we've neglected so much of seeing this way of being, this way of movement as legitimate, as not only legitimate for transportation, but as like extremely important for our mental and social health and well-being and for the planet and so on and so on. And so I just say one of the things that I also did the Camino de Santiago with my father. There's a story in the book about that. I've done lots of walking in other places outside the US and comparing, you know, that the Camino de Santiago, for those of you, the pilgrimage path in Spain that has a lot of different paths going to Santiago, but also the coastal areas, is such an incredible teacher of what's possible when we think about at least getting closer to centering a mode, a pace through places in space. But I have focused most of my long distance walking in the US, where I'm combining and constantly experimenting with the tension of the benefits and the harm, the benefits and the harm. And that's what informs pedestrian dignity. I see a question here about my artwork. It's what informs my artwork. Like I would say it's both inner and outer journey, because it's the outer informs the in, and then my, you know, just imperfect lived experiences help to relate to that. There's a practice in the book that I have titled called Nature Sees Me. And so it speaks to some of the other areas that I sink into in this book, you know, after really kind of grounding in just the dignity aspects, the humility aspects, the built environment aspects. Then it's like softening the invitations a little bit around, like, you know, this, like when we're out moving in an unhurried way and we're allowing ourselves to let go, if we can, if we can, because I can't tell you how many people I've moved with who can never let go because they're always grinding, always on edge, depending on where they live, what resources they have, what support they have. But if we are able to let go, or let go in community, I mean, my gosh, the trees have a lot to say, the rivers have a lot to say. And so a lot of my work is trying to experiment with how to storytell and advocate for connected pedestrian walking paths. And I think specifically because it's so unsafe, it's why I do a lot of group walks, especially, you know, a lot of the people, I would say 80% of the people coming to our events are women, because they feel safer in a group space moving through. Like it is 80%, and so how then can we connect that, not, you know, but how can we connect it to advocacy and other things so that it just only becomes safer to do that whenever you want or need to.
Thank you. So Alexandra, and then Bill, I guess, had a question. But I know Bob is, Bill Sharp, did you get your question answered within that question? Or do you want to talk more about Jonathon's artwork? Because I know
Bob.
Bob.
Hi. Yes. I want to thank both of you. It's been a fascinating and very stimulating discussion.
I particularly wanted to ask Jonathon about his artwork because when I am walking, I'm often thinking about how beautiful the landscape is, and I sometimes try to stop and draw a picture. But mostly I just end up doing it at home and being kind of frustrated because then I'm not there on location. But of course it was raining and wet and I was working in watercolor and so on. But I'm just asking you, what is the relationship between the outer and the inner? And do you actually try to do anything while you're in motion on the trail or in a city?
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, it's honestly it's all the above. It really, it shows up differently, honestly, depending on the landscape sometimes or how long I have to walk. If I'm on a multi-day or multi-week experience or even multi-month, it's pretty amazing how I can drop into a drawing, especially I think getting into the third or fourth day or the second or third week. Um, I'll very intentionally drop into, getting into a piece in different iterations. And I honestly, chapter 5 is titled Walking as Relationship. And I try to expand the relationship beyond just human to human. And it's like, it literally feels like this relational, I've slowed down enough. What we know for those, all the things that go on in our brain, the neural networks, Shane O'Mara's book, In Praise of Walking, like some really good neuroscience on after just 20 minutes, we're creating new neural pathways. Whenever I'm hosting events, I have everybody repeat that back to me. I'm gonna need y'all to repeat that. New neural path, new ones. And I'm like, so we're moving in an unhurried. So when I have my sketchbooks with me and my pencils or pens, it's amazing the longer I'm giving myself to move that way and wanting to listen for drawing inspiration. It's amazing how it'll show up. William, I never actually do full finished pieces though while I'm out. I just get really detailed sketch ideas and then I come back to to my space, and then I sink into the pieces that I created and listen for that. So that's usually the flow. It's not like the painter where you're just out doing the live thing. I'm doing mostly taking notes and drafts. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I know
Yeah.
Robert Parks has waving his hand, and I've been seeing you, and we're about at time. So this is our last question. I always feel like we have so much more to say and wish that we could all adjourn to a common place and talk more. But Bob, go ahead.
I'm fighting my way through Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of perception and trying to relate it to walking. So what he does, he says, focuses more on our bodies and our bodies' knowledge over intellectual and scientific. So it's to explore our perception of what seems to be as yet unexplored sensation.
That's wonderful and very relevant.
I think I quoted him, actually.
Yeah, I think you might have too.
Because I have some sections in there on digital technology, and there's a wonderful essay in Aeon magazine about embodied learning, and it was specifically about his work. And I'm not going to remember what page it's on or exactly what the quote is, but I think even if people haven't read that work, which is, that's some difficult reading to get into, that you can experience it anyway, that sense of learning the world through your body. I mean, when I was writing my book, I was going to places like Denver and Nottingham and Norfolk, all sorts of places where I was doing research. And when I was doing that, I was just walking for miles and miles every day. And I did have a huge shift in the way that I feel present in the world. Just waking up one day and realizing that my body wanted to walk like 7 miles more than it wanted coffee. And you have to walk a lot to get back to that. And I think that's how humans evolved. I think that's how we've felt through most of our evolutionary history. And I think that learning that, you don't have to read that work to get back to that learning, but there has been recent research, like just the beginnings of it on this interoception I don't know if you've heard of that. It's that, you know, you've got proprioception, which tells you where your body is in the world, and you have a vestibular system, and other sensory things that help you move through the world. Interoception is the way that your brain tells you what's going on in your body. So it's kind of at the forefront of all these studies about how emotions, it's not like something happens in your brain and it has an effect on your body. It's that your body actually does something and that your mind creates a story about it. You know, so like anxiety, depression, fear, like anxiety and excitement actually look the same in the brain. So it's really fascinating stuff. And I think that research is only just beginning. And I think you can find your own way into it through having walking be a regular and consistent part of your life. That's a great question. I appreciate you getting into that, because I can nerd out about that for a really long time.
I love that. And yeah, I know we're a little past time, so I'll just a quick little addition to that. It's why, Robert, for me, it is my primary brain, and it is imperfect and funky. I have no idea what it's saying, and yet sometimes I feel I know exactly what it's saying, and it slams together. The knowing and the unknowing slamming together in a big old pot of nothing and everything. And so it's why it was really hard for me to write a book, because to put words to it felt like I just like, God, this doesn't actually get to it. Can I just like do audios of grunts and moans? And I feel like my audiobook, I feel so much more connected to the audiobook sometimes because I'm able to emote some of the story. But it's why I care so much about practices and however I got a message from somebody last week saying, I just need you to know how, like I referenced the nature sees me practice. And they just said, like, I went out and I took that practice. These practices are they're simple in writing context. But she's just like, it's changed my whole relationship to my walks, because I am trying to allow myself to feel like the tree actually sees me, you know, and it's like that. Like, so those kind, like the practices is what I was experimenting around your exact question, like trusting that people will have these really profound or not just experiences somatically that are just beyond what the mind can hold.
I think there's an area in hallucination that I'm exploring in relation to art. Particularly interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we have to end. We could just keep going on and yes.
I know. Well, that leads perfectly into climate change. So we've got another 2 hours. We can just keep running.
Yes, exactly. No, we didn't get there. There are a lot of places that we can still go, but I urge you all to read these books and maybe join another conversation. We are for Walking America. I've done 3 so far, and there will be a 4th sometime this year, probably in the summer, but I have not booked who that's going to be yet. And if people have nominations for American authors who are writing about walking, I'm actually looking, I have a novel that I'm considering, and I would love to pair her with another novelist. And I also have a poet I'm considering, and I'm looking at other poets to pair her with. So I'm open to suggestions as well as part of this community. And I also want to say that William Sharp, who is here, who has written an amazingly beautiful and fascinating book about walking, the history in 100 images, is going to be interviewed by Andrew next week on Tuesday. So I don't know if Andrew wants to say more, but thank you all for coming, and especially thanks to all the people that I see from the UK, which is valiant of you to stay up and come to this and hear about what happens with walking in America.
Okay, well, so a big thank you to Anne, Jonathan, and Antonia. That's been a fantastic evening. Really good conversation, lots of points to discuss. I have to put my hand up and actually say I worked in a highways authority in the 90s.
That's right.
My job was to discourage people from driving their cars, their automobiles. I know exactly many of the issues that you guys are talking about. America is much worse than many European countries, but Australia is very similar to America. So there are lots and lots of issues. And when you start talking about the global south, the sheer numbers of people who are killed as pedestrians trying to make their way about is absolutely frightening. Really fabulous evening. Thanks very much to you three. Really, really entertaining. And hope to see everyone on other occasions. So we'll end it there. And thanks a lot. Anne, do you want the last word?
Well, I just want to say thank you very much, and thank you to Jonathon and Antonia, especially for this wonderful conversation. And all of you have come, and I think all of you come and been audiences at the other Walking America. I feel there are themes that are developing. So as we keep going, I think there's going to be some interesting things to maybe talk about, and if audiences come that keep coming repeatedly, we can dive into some of those themes together, because there is something different about walking in this weird country and continent of ours. And I think that it's an extremely beautiful landscape with a lot of, as Antonia said, barriers. And there's also a lot of issues historically, politically, that I think kept coming up with these walks. So I'm excited to explore that further. Thank you.